What do spirituality and technology have in common? My guest today, Cassandra Shuck, is a shaman. She is a businesswoman. She's a coach. And she also works in tech. And we have a fantastic conversation today about this very topic of what is the intersection between technology and spirituality. And spoiler alert, it all comes down to interconnectedness and how we connect with one another. So welcome to this week's episode of the PS We Expire podcast. I am your host, Morgan Motzinger, and I am really looking forward to getting to share with you my conversation with Cass. I met Cass not that long ago, and we had a really amazing introductory conversation. I then hired her to do a one-on-one session with me in the realm of spirituality, and then invited her to be on this podcast so that we could share her wisdom, her experience, her life experience, and also her experience within the tech world and as an entrepreneur, a businesswoman, and also getting into the conversation of artificial intelligence, which is really like knocking at our technological door. If it isn't already like 1 foot in the house, is probably more accurate to say for where we're at right now with this development. So I'm really excited for you to get to hear this conversation between us today. If you have really enjoyed listening to this podcast, please go over to, Spotify or Apple or wherever you listen to this. Not only hit the subscribe button, but also please rate and leave a review. The more that you do that, the more that people get to have this suggested to them for listening material. So if you have found any of these episodes to be helpful, please do that so that more people can have an ear out and see this podcast. So thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I'm so glad that you are here. Cass, I'm so thrilled to have this conversation with you today. I feel like your experience and your wisdom and what you're working on right now is going to just give so much, not just like value to my listeners, but also such a sense of like deep interconnectedness and synchronicity. And so can we just start with you maybe giving, I know you have like a lot of experience that we could take down so many winding paths, but why don't you just give us like a little intro into what life is like for you right now and kind of how you got to the work that you're doing right now?
Oh my goodness. So what life is like for me right now, the first word that comes to mind is transition, which I feel like we're always in a sea of transitions and we're always in a season where we're moving from one thing to the next. But mine is kind of culminating between, the businesses that I run. We're in the process of moving next month, which is crazy to me. I'm like, oh, we just moved a couple of years ago and now we're moving again. So just a lot of moving parts, which is honestly is where I thrive and what I'm good at. But it's happening again, so if that makes any sense whatsoever. So, and then a little bit about me. I am a mama to 2 little girls. I am a wife. I am a tech entrepreneur, own an AI company, an app, a lot of other things that are more into the deep tech space. And I'm a shaman, which makes no sense until we actually talk about what sort of technology that we're actually creating. So
I love that. Can you just define for my listeners like what a shaman is? Because I do think that a lot of people who have not delved into the spiritual space at all just hear that and like constrict, and there's a lot of like I don't know, and there's a lot of fear, and there's all of this stuff. So if you could just kind of define what shamanism is and then what your role within shamanism and I mean that's probably not even the correct like terminology, but go ahead and roll with it.
Yeah, so I view a shaman as just someone who can work between different realms. So I can tap into spiritual teams, I can tap into plants and energy and medicine and animals and kind of get information from a lot of sources, if you will. I look at them as the extrasensory ones of the bunch that actually feel and see and understand and hear everything from everyone around them. That's kind of my diagnosis, if you will. I always say that I'm like, if I were to test on an autism scale, I would be probably off the freaking charts because there's constant information and inundation coming into me. And that's been like that since I was a little kid. Didn't know that that's what that was, but that's kind of the path that I've kind of taken. And then shamanism, some people will call it a religion. I don't consider it a religion. I kind of consider it more of a path of life and more of a spiritual path. So I am religious. I go to church every Sunday. I'm non-denominational Christian, which throws a lot of people off because they're like, but you work with rocks and you work with herbs and you work with plants and you work with medicines and celestial beings and other things that are from, not necessarily this ether. But I'm like, yeah, but I also believe that there's God and Jesus. Like they can coexist together, which is kind of one of the dogma things that I think I'm on this earth to kind of break down a little bit.
What I like about that so much is like if we're going to talk about like the interconnectedness of all things, which I know it probably will end up being the through line for our conversation today, is that when there is this like understanding of how much our culture influences how we respond to particular personalities or gifts or talents or whatever. And so for you to be raised in a Western culture that when you had this, when you're a highly sensitive person, many people will like in Western cultures will slap diagnoses on that and try and, get back into the like quote unquote normal way of doing things.
And medicine on top of that.
Yes.
It's not only a diagnosis, it's okay, let's take away your gift. Okay, let's take away the fact that you feel things. Let's take away the fact that you hear things.
Yeah, so absolutely.
The diagnosis, which is the identity, but then it's also the medication, which changes the identity.
So like in Western cultures, when kids present with these extra gifts or these talents or these sensory perceptions and are taking in all the information, and we label it and diagnose it and medicate it, if there's a child who's born in a different culture, that actually may be revered and encouraged and not just accepted, but like heralded as like, this is a beacon of, yes, this is the person that is going to be connecting us to more than what we can just see in this tangible, the 3D reality. And so I think that's a really interesting conversation. And I'm so curious, like how did you make your way to that in this culture?
So I basically followed the way of doing things in this culture. So I kind of grew up in a very hectic, chaotic, turbulent household, which is probably why I'm like okay with transition and okay with moving across the country again. But nothing was ever safe in my childhood. So I didn't really have the opportunity to kind of fully express who I was. I kind of shut down a lot of my things. I spent a lot of time outside. I spent a lot of time connecting with, nature. I would go back in the trails behind my house and spend hours and hours out there, even though that was always the place that was dangerous. Like, don't go back there. That's where bad people are. But really, my whole upbringing, my whole childhood was physical, mental, and sexual abuse, kind of age 5 through 15 when I finally left. So it was interesting because the place that I felt the safest was the place that I was warned about. And I wasn't very, very well taken care of. I was a child of 2 addicts. So I kind of took care of myself a little bit. And when I moved out, I kind of dumped my heart and soul and being into the next achievement system, if you will. So I dropped out of high school, not a great student, tested into college with my SAT scores. I got into a couple different colleges and picked the one that gave me the highest scholarship, if you will. And then it was kind of at that point after doing, a bachelor's in 3 years and being 19 years old, where I was like, and things were starting to settle and starting to become a little bit more normal and starting to become like a little bit more sustaining on my own, where I was having a lot of my childhood stuff come up and a lot of kind of some of my giftings and some of the pieces that I was starting to unravel. And I did what everyone does, and they go to therapy. And then you start talking about what you're feeling, seeing, hearing, sensing, and then they slap a diagnosis on you. And then that diagnosis comes with 3 medicines, which quickly turns into 5 medicines, which quickly turns for me into 9, 11, and 13 medicines. And it was, God forbid she should have anxiety and depression. So then we'll give her something for that. And then digestion issues come up. So we'll give her something for that. And now she's not sleeping. So here's Ambien. Enjoy some good rest. And then the Ambien would cause, migraines and headaches. So they're like, okay, birth control, because God forbid you should get pregnant on this cocktail of medicine. So it's just kind of like this cascade that I had to go through it, kind of a rapid accelerated path. And then honestly, one day I woke up and I was like, this is not, I got really good at swallowing handfuls of pills. And something literally woke up when I woke up one day and I looked at it and I was like, this does not feel right. I don't know why and what, and I don't remember what day it was. I don't remember anything about that. All I know is it was a deep sense of, no, I don't want to do this anymore. And I had kind of done that track and that trajectory for about 3 years, kind of this whole slew of pills and medication and not feeling and suppression. And then it was the undoing of that, which took a lot longer.
What did the undoing look like?
Oh, goodness. So this is not advised. This is not medical advice. Do not do this. Just spoiler alert. I basically got off most of my medicines and I started working kind of with a mentor, but I did it unmedically supervised. So I would literally cut pills in half and quarter and just kind of taper myself off things at one at a time. And basically figured out how to get off of them myself. And then I went to an ashram that I have gone to at a lot of different circumstances in my life when, kind of shit hits the fan, if you will. And I basically cold turkey got off the final 5 medicines in about 5 weeks at a silent retreat in an ashram. Which the minute I got off kind of those final ones, a lot of stuff started coming up, which I'm so very thankful that I was with, one of my spiritual teachers and one of my mentors, because I was in her office every day for at least 2 hours and reading through spiritual texts and really deep. We dove into, she has beautiful background. She is kind of a Catholic background, but she follows the Bhagavad Gita, the yogic texts, kind of the more Ayurvedic-esque scripts. And she just would pair things together, and she knew where to go, and she would open a book and she would highlight a verse and then open another book and highlight a verse and show how they were connected and show it would be exactly what I needed to hear at that moment. But it was about a 5-week process, literally just crumbling down. In Marajé is her name, in her office daily, and she's in this office in like a basement, so like, as you can imagine, books floor to ceiling in like this dark little room with this 90-year-old woman crying in boxes and boxes of tissue. So it's like, this is the sexy spiritual work right here.
I think that's so important to say that, because we really do have this, like, I mean, I guess I shouldn't say we collective, but my experience has been this belief that if I'm doing spirituality correctly, I'm gonna feel great all the time. And if something's coming in that doesn't feel great, then I am doing it wrong. And from my experience, it's like, no, actually you're doing it right, because that means you're allowing everything. You're allowing the highs and the lows, and you're allowing yourself to feel the depths of whatever you happen to be feeling. And for someone that comes from a really traumatic childhood experience like yours, it makes sense that you would need to turn down the internal volume. I would imagine that there's so much coming up, and if there is a lack of support or skills to know how to manage and alchemize everything that's coming up, what other option do you have than to try and just silence it?
And it's so easy, and we're taught to run, and we're taught to not to feel, and we're taught not to sit in the discomfort. And I don't generally use this phrase, but one of Marajé's phrases is "no mud, no lotus." You'd be like talking about the shit and feeling awful and kind of be in your own little wallow pile of garbage. And she'd literally look at you, straight face, 90-year-old woman, which you can't get mad at a 90-year-old little like 4'11" woman. It doesn't happen. And she goes, "No mud, no lotus. You're fine." And you're like, damn, ow. Like, but it's coming from a place of love too. So that's the phrase that kind of, when you were talking about this, just came up and reminded me of like, that is spiritual work. No mud, no lotus.
Right. There can't be any growth without any hardship or any resistance. That's, I've shared this multiple times, but like, I had this rose bush that was just like not putting any roses out at all for a long time. And I finally, a friend of mine who has gorgeous roses was like, just posted on Instagram, like, it's time to prune my roses. And I was like, oh, maybe I should prune my rose bush, and it felt so counterintuitive to be cutting off all of this life. And it looked so terrible when I got done pruning. I was like, there's no way this thing is going to survive. And lo and behold, the thing just like exploded with growth, and there were blooms on it for the first time in years. And I was so struck by that metaphor of how important it is for us to go through the really hard phases of cutting off things in our lives that aren't working anymore, and saying no. When we hear that in ourselves, that inner knowing that says, no, I'm not going to do this anymore. That part of you that said, no, I'm not taking this handful of pills for the rest of my life. I'm not going to continue to do things the way that I'm doing them. And that's when the opportunities blossom. That's when we have the options. That's when everything becomes open to us, because we're not stuck in this like one way of thinking about things anymore.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's exactly correct. And I feel like it's so funny because as much as we'd all love the spiritual path to be like the yellow brick road and we go skipping down it, what I'm finding kind of happening in the spiritual space now, which I'm feeling called to kind of, talk about and share a little bit, is this element of going through a hard time and not actually feeling it and just being like, oh, it's for a bigger purpose. No big deal. Like, oh, it's okay. It's my next up level, but not actually feeling the anger, not feeling the sadness, not feeling grief, not feeling pain. Because, like there's one element of you that, yes, understands that everything is divinely orchestrated and guided. But there's another element that's like, if you don't feel those feelings, they're trapped emotions and they're going to get stuck in the body. And I'm seeing that a lot actually kind of in the space that we're in right now, kind of as a culture and as a society of like, oh, it's for my best interest that, I got fired from my job, lost my husband, and, had a stillborn. I'm like, wait, hold on, time the fuck out. Like, no, it's not. Like, you still have to feel that deep sadness and still feel the feelings. You can't just assign things a spiritual little golden yellow ticket.
Yeah, that's really what was creating a lot of problems for me, was when I remember sitting by my daughter's bed and thinking about how I wasn't supposed to feel sad because I believed that heaven was ahead for her, that a restored body was ahead for her. And so it made me feel like I wasn't allowed to grieve what I was losing, and to grieve this reality for my child, because it was like, don't think about that, only think about, what's ahead on the other side. And that is what ended up causing so many problems, like in my physical body, was because I didn't allow myself to just be sad and be angry and be full of grief for what was happening right in front of me. So how do people actually, what does that look like for people to actually feel their feelings? I mean, that sounds like such a silly, simple question, but that's exactly what we're talking about, is like, as if we consistently numb and avoid and escape and run away from how we're feeling. But how do we feel what we're feeling?
Yeah. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is like giving ourselves space to do that. Because like we live in a society that rewards busyness, that rewards having a packed calendar, that rewards having, 9,208 emails to answer. That's like our reward and achievement system. I talk to some clients and I'm like, you need to meditate. And they're like, I have not even 5 minutes a day to pee. I was like, that literally worries me, like as a society and as a culture, because if we're on this kind of treadmill or on this hamster wheel, like it's very easy to avoid feelings. It's very easy to avoid kind of what's going on in your life, because there's no space. You can just fill it up with a whole bunch of other noise. So for me, like one of my spiritual practices is to get quiet. I'm not a great meditator. I can meditate out in nature and I can walk for miles and get really intentional and get all of my downloads, all of my clarity. But for me, automatic writing is what works the best. So I sit there, and automatic writing, for those of you guys who don't know, it is basically you sit there with a blank notebook and you set a timer and you just keep the pen moving the entire thing. So if it's 30 minutes, I wouldn't start with 30 minutes, little
That's a lot.
I was like, if it's 30 minutes, I do 30 minutes. So if it's 5 minutes, let's start there first. You'll take the pen and you'll keep the pen moving for 5 minutes. And what'll happen is about 15 seconds in, you'll be like, I have nothing to write. And you keep writing. And sometimes I work with some prompts. I have a series of prompts that I work with. And I'll start, on a prompt of like, what am I grateful for? What seems hard in my life right now? And I'll end up with like how much my kid pissed me off, and this client didn't respond, and this person sent this email, and this company called me 37 times. They're pissing me off because I said I wanted to ship my car. Now they sold my information, and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
Like it'll spiral. And that's perfectly okay because it's getting out of the body. It's being excavated. So then it can be somewhere else and not in the physical body. And in that, 5 minutes, 30 minutes, whatever the case is that you feel called to sit there and write, you'll cycle through anger, you'll cycle through grief, you'll cycle through shame, you'll cycle through fear, you'll cycle through excitement and happiness and joy and peace and tranquility, and you'll have all of these feelings. So basically what happens after I put the pen down, I'm like, like it's just because it's all gone. It's not, I'm no longer like having it in my mind, and I'm no longer having it in my body. So I think that's kind of one of my practices, if you will, to how to feel your feelings. But then the other thing that's coming to mind too is like, we don't often have a person or people in our life who can be like, how are you? And it's like, I'm fine. I'm good. And I'm like, yeah, but how, like one of my famous questions for all of my friends, I'm like, yeah, but how are you really? And like, how's your heart? And they're like, oh shit. And then they go into, well, this happened to this kid, and this happened to this family, and this dynamic, and blah, blah, blah. But it's like, we live in such a culture where it's not okay to like, be like, oh, you know what? Today's a shitty day. I have a migraine because I woke up, blah, 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 whatever the case may be. Like, to actually express it, like we have to be good. We have to be like, fine is our benchmark. And then it has to be fine, great, good. Like there's levels above it, but there's nothing below it in kind of the society that we live in.
The image that comes to mind is like a sponge that when it's full, it literally cannot take on any more water, and it has to be wrung out first. And so it sounds like what you're saying is like introducing habits and practices into our lives to wring the sponge out. So for you, automatic writing, wring that sponge out, get all of the emotion out of the body. Wring the sponge out by being able to talk to people who can hold space for you, and to be able to actually be curious and want to know how you're doing. I
want to actually tap off your sponge comment for a second. But I had a client the other day, and we had this whole conversation about sponge versus chameleon. And this is going to make no sense whatsoever until I actually start explaining it. And she was saying, well, when I'm in a space with different people, I kind of mold and, kind of change who I am, and kind of, so I can absorb, and they can feel loved, and they can feel seen, and they can feel validated. But in that changing in her chameleon of herself, she's basically absorbing things that are not her own. So my conversation for her was like, you can be a chameleon, and you can reflect back, and you can show someone love, and you can show someone respect, and you can show someone, interest, even though if they're not the same belief system, you can kind of mold. But I said, you can't absorb. So that was kind of our whole conversation between her of like, she right now is absorbing in order to feel that, and to make them feel loved, seen, heard, worthy, balanced, whatever the case may be, versus actually reflecting back. So I said, the thing like that I teach and that I have practiced probably for far too long of, I don't know, probably since the beginning of my spiritual practice, is like, how do I not absorb from my clients, and how do I not absorb from my friends, but how do I still see them, love them, validate them, which is a really, really hard task, especially
what's the answer? How do we do that?
Practice. And it is using some of those tools to, to be able to reflect back. Because I said to her, when we were kind of chatting, I said, do you feel like I love you and see you and witness you and can feel you? And she's like, yeah, absolutely. I said, I'm not absorbing anything from you. And that's not to be harsh. That's just, I'm not taking it from you. I'm reflecting it back. I'm asking questions. I'm being inquisitive, but I'm not like, we also have this tendency to be like, here, give me your trauma. I'll fix it. I know this person. You can talk to this person, do this. I had a friend who took this herb and it worked really well. And I'm like, like breathe, reflect back, be present. That's the key word there, presence.
Yeah. And true presence requires that we allow someone else to feel whatever they're feeling. I found this to be a really challenging thing with my children. When, especially with my little guy, who is like very expressive on all the highs and the lows, are very expressive, and to work through what I felt like was part of my job as a parent was to like always get him back to this like baseline. And I don't think that that's actually true. I think what's true is that I teach him how to feel everything that he's feeling all the way through. And
Mhm.
that means that I have to be okay with being uncomfortable myself, with not fixing it and
Yeah.
not soothing it away and not minimizing it, or not, any of those things. And I think that we have a tendency to do that in our friendships, in our relationships with people that we really love and we really care about. And I think the two ways that this shows up is like, one of the ways is that we do kind of get into that spin really quickly of like, how do I fix this for the other person? But we
Mhm.
also then tend to not have hard conversations where we reveal what we really think and what we really feel, and how their behavior actually has impacted us, because we don't want to watch them be in pain or discomfort or sadness because of how we really feel. And
Yes.
that's been a big part of my journey, is like separating myself enough from other people's experiences and validating my own experience, and coming from a place of like deep self-love and deep self-trust that then allows me and enables me to meet someone else exactly where they're at. And that's the only thing that works when we come into conversation with people who have very different values, very different beliefs, very different worldviews than we do. Like, we have to
Mhm.
come at it from a place of like non-judgment for ourselves, because that is what then enables us to be non-judgmental with the other person.
Yeah, we have something called internal in my teams, and but then also on the social platform that I'm building, called UC, and it's
Mm,
uncomfortable conversation. And it's just basically a space or a stage that you can take. And then you're not looking for feedback. You're not looking for something to be changed. You're not looking for, really things to be bounced off of or solutions. You're just there to like speak and get things off of your chest. And it's all the uncomfortable shit. So it's just
mm.
giving kind of a voice to the things that we typically suppress. And we do it in our day-to-day relationships, and via social media that's made it 10 times worse, because it's happy facade, highlight reel, look at where I'm traveling, look at how great my kids are, their outfits always match and their hair is always perfect.
Mm.
Bullshit.
Mm.
So yeah, we live in this kind of very facade-esque culture right now, and it's not good for mental health, and it's not good for embodiment, and it's not good for being present and sitting with another human, because we've lost that part.
So how do we come back to that? Because I do think that with the dawn of, probably not so much the internet, but with social media, that
Mhm.
we have lost our ability to be honest, um, because there are so many people that now have access to being able to share their opinions about whatever we're saying. And so it's like, it almost is like diluting it to make it palpable for everybody. I
Yeah.
want everybody to feel okay about what I'm saying. And that's not reality. We're living in this like fake reality where everybody tends then to hide who they really are. So how are you in your company, in your companies, how are you navigating that and working to solve that?
Yeah, so I feel like there's two different groups out there. There is the group that has this kind of fake facade, and I have to have, beliefs that appease everyone. And I feel like there's the other group, which is a smaller percentage of like the keyboard warriors who like will put their opinion about everything and bash
Mm,
everyone as quickly as humanly possible if it's not their direct belief system. And that goes for all sides and all different perspectives of all different, highly controversial topics. It's not just one group or the other. It's those who, believe that their belief system is the only belief system that actually matters, which to me is just as detrimental as, if not more, as the people who are like, I don't have a belief about that. So I
mm,
feel like when I look at things, I look at a lot of things on a spectrum, and my whole goal is to bring things back into balance. And that's been my goal for now the better part of 15 years. I named my company 15 years ago without knowing, called Tola, and it literally means to bring back into balance. And I was like,
mm,
why didn't I name it like abundance and prosperity, or like ease and flow, like grace? Like, could have named it so many better things.
mm.
But like my whole thing is like balance, like bring it back into balance, because I don't want, like, you don't want to change people from like having an opinion, but I want people to be able to have their beliefs, be so secure in their beliefs, and can have another discussion with another human being. There's this piece from behavioral economics that actually says if you see the humanity behind the decision and you see the humanity behind the belief, you'll start to question your own beliefs and you'll start to question where they came from. And that's kind of really the approach that I'm taking on social, is like, I'm taking someone who, like, just for sake of example, because we're going into a political year, extreme left and extreme right, and I'm putting them together. And basically, if you can see the person behind the conversation, you're not going to go resorting to, negative derogatory terms within 3 comments, but you're actually going to say, okay, why do you believe that? Okay, where did that come from? Okay, what about this? Do you believe that this and this can coexist? You're going to start to have questions that then you start internally going, wow, did I just adopt my belief from my parents because they said that they were, X, Y, and Z? Now I say I'm X, Y, and Z, but I don't really believe in that. So but we don't really have, because right now it's the only way to actually capitalize on social media is time spent on platform. And when you can get two people pinned against each other and bashing one another and constantly checking the phone to see if the other person responded, that benefits the platform, time spent on platform. It doesn't benefit the fact that they need to go back and take a step and do a quiet meditation to see, like, oh shit, I don't believe that anymore. That was just something I adopted. So our metrics are totally different. So we can encourage people to get off if we have something called the downward spiral. So if you're starting to engage and starting to be negative and starting to kind of go into your own little hole of negativity, we're actually going to give you a pause and tell you to go, go take a walk, go play solitaire, go play outside with your kids, go check the mail, like do something else. Because what you're doing right now from a wellness perspective and from a wellness index perspective is not good for you anymore. And it's not good for then society.
So oh man, I have so many questions about this. Do you think that it's safe to say that there are some people that will never be interested in having those types of conversations?
100%. And that's what Twitter's for. So my joke is, I've talked to some people and they're like, are you trying to get everyone off of social media and everyone off of Facebook and Instagram and Twitter? I said, no. I said, there are some people who their sole mission is to post on Twitter. Please do it over there. Like, go ahead. But if you're on a path, which I feel like a lot of people are on this path, especially since 2020, of questioning, of wondering where belief systems, of wondering where news comes from, all of these pieces where they're starting to test the boundaries and beliefs. That's who I want, which I feel like there's enough of the population that's starting to wake up and starting to go, that's a little bit fishy. That feels a little bit strange. That person said that and that person said this, but what did they really say? And was that taken out of context? They're starting to question kind of the whole scene, like the whole scenes of everything that's going on. I mean, about school systems, about, COVID stuff, about political stuff, about everything. Like there's so much stuff going on. Like the stage has been set that like people are starting to go, that's a little bit off.
I think it's a really important time for people to do that too, with how quickly AI is changing things.
Oh my gosh.
That we are becoming less and less able to distinguish between what is real and what is not. And the goal of like actually having conversations with another human is a really, really important goal. And also, I think the shift is going to be towards that, towards industries and people that are doing the work of connecting humans with humans again, and reclaiming these parts of ourselves that have been lost as we have tried to navigate for the first time access to more information than we've ever had, and more people having access to than ever in human history. Our little tiny tribes have suddenly exploded into thousands and millions of people that all have an opinion about the things that we're doing. And I think that with how quickly AI is changing things, I suspect that the pendulum is going to swing back the other way, where people are then coming back into touch with nature, with each other, and with ourselves. Yeah. I
hope so. I mean, so it's funny because the way that AI is programmed right now, that it's continuing to push people to a disassociative, depend on computers, depend on technology path. I had zero desire to get into the AI space until one day when I was kind of doing some work and I got this message, and it was AI is as close to human consciousness as we're ever going to get, period. And I'm like, well, fuck. Like, if I work in the consciousness space and my goal is to raise consciousness and to raise connection and to raise kind of awareness and vibration, and AI is as close as we're going to get, guess who's starting an AI company?
Sure.
And that's kind of how that kind of came about. And, you know, my whole goal was to merge human consciousness with AI. Because right now, the biggest piece that I have an issue with is the people who are programming it, their biases, their sexism, their misogyny, their belief system, their beliefs, their racism, whatever the case may be, whatever they're bringing to the table is being coded. And with machine learning and machine graded AI, basically your bias every time it gets graded, it might be 1% when it starts, and then the next time it's 2, the next time it's 4, the next time it's 8, 16, 32, 64, and then you have basically one giant biased supercomputer. And I was like, that to me does not feel like a proper check and balance. That to me does not feel aligned. That to me does not feel like there's proper infusions of human consciousness and a safe bias across all of them to diminish bias. So basically what we did was my team and I, we started to step into this AI kind of world, and we were originally creating it for the platform for Aligned. And we're like, actually, no, this needs to be a framework that we sell to other companies that is humane, benevolent, wellness focused AI, which like is not really heard of that much right now.
Yeah. That's, I didn't realize until just now that that's a big part of what you were doing. And that actually gives me so much hope, because I think that is what people don't understand. And you know, I will just say, like, I'm not a huge tech person. I don't have a really like firm grip on like what AI is and how it's going to change our lives. However, I do understand that, like what you're saying, there's a small group of people right now that are teaching or giving AI their Jiminy Cricket, basically, like the conscious, what is right and what is wrong, and is learning how people behave and how humans behave based on this small group of people. And there needs to be much more diversity within that space, so that as AI is developing, it's understanding that, like, yeah, not most of humanity is not as polarized as that. There is a much bigger space that is gray, where there is so much flow and flexibility, and you may have one person who has left-leaning sensibilities and for one part of their life, and right-leaning sensibilities for a different part of their life. And if AI is only learning from a small group of people that lean a particular way, that's bad news.
Well, it's not even necessarily lean a particular way. It's just when I look at it and I'm like looking at, like, if you ask, like, I'll just use Chat GPT for an example, because it's kind of what, I mean, AI has been around for a while, like, but like Chat GPT kind of gave it a little bit more stage presence, if you will. So like for that as an example, if you just ask some hard questions and you ask questions about you know, political parties, you ask questions about racism, you ask questions about spirituality, and you look at the answers, there's zero objective to them. There's a mission, there is a kind of orientation with each of those questions, which is what worries me the most. Because I'm like, when I look at it and what kind of we're building is our human graders, we have every ethnicity, we have every race, every age, we have every, you know, we have a representative from every LGBTQ kind of side. So like our answers are a lot different than, this is the best president, this is the worst one. This is the best religion, this is the worst one. There's only one God. There's the, like, it basically devaluates, you know, 98% of the population. I'm like, that doesn't make sense. And it's interesting because I totally agree with you that, like, I say 80% is in the middle and in this flow state and is in this like constant questioning growth kind of phase, if you will, where they might believe some things over here, might believe some things over here. And then the 10% on either side are, you know, the minority, but they're the loud ones. And they're a lot of times the ones with the money and the ones with the control and the ones with the power. And the ones that want the 80% to feel fractionated, to not feel connected, to not feel that we're the majority, because if they are the loudest and they separate us, they can take control of only having 20%, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah. So something that I want to go back to something that you said earlier about how, from your perspective, having a really dogmatic way of looking at things and a really like, this is how it is as dangerous as having no solid opinions about anything. And a coming out of a perspective of having like a really dogmatic view on things into this space where more than anything, what I say is, well, I don't know.
Yeah.
So like in this space, how can you marry the humility to say there's so much that I don't know, and also a conviction of values, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, so some of the phrases that just come to mind that I use, because people will ask me my opinion. They're like, well, because no one knows anything, any opinions about me, about anything. They're like, who did you vote for? I'm like, none of your damn business. Who did you believe? Who do you believe in? Or what's your religion? None of your damn business. Like, I'm just like, I'm so ambiguous that it confuses people. But for me, if I'm like asked a very direct question, I might like take a moment and be like, okay, I believe X, Y, and Z because X, Y, and Z, but there are other, like, I'll give a nod and be like, there's things I don't know about that. Like, just for sake of example, because, you know, we've kind of hinted at religion, like I'm non-denominational Christian. Is that bad or good? There's some people who are like non-denominational Christian isn't a Christianity at all, period. And I'm like, great, that's your belief system. That's not mine. So like there's this element of grace, and I have things that I am unshakable on, that I know that are part of me and that are my values and belief systems. And I don't need to change anyone. That's the difference. Like that's a big difference, is like I don't need to evangelicalize, I don't need to convince, I don't need to, you know, coerce you into believing something that you don't believe. Like if my thing with my kind of circle of friends and my people, I'm like, if you have a belief system, although it could be complete and polar opposite me, for me, as long as you have facts that you believe that you can back it up, we can be friends. Because like I want to know, like I have friends who have total like polar opposite views of me. I'm like, okay, why do you believe that? And they're like, oh, this and this. And I'm like, great, perfect. Now if you're like, I believe this, and I'm like, why do you believe that? And they're like, I don't know, my mom said it was true. I'm like, oh no, sorry, pump the brakes, can't have this conversation. Like I need, and I think that we're not really taught to inventory our belief systems, and we're not really taught to kind of check and take notice as where things come and what we've inherited, if you will, and what we've been given versus like what we actually truly believe at our core based upon our own findings, research, experience, blueprint. So as long as you have a findings, research, experience blueprint, I have no problem with your belief system. And I feel like most people are like that. So it's just, that's not what's rewarded in the current day and age yet.
That's to put a really fine point on it. That's exactly right, because people who question are much more difficult to control.
Yes.
You know, because it is like, I don't like the way that this is. I don't believe in the choices that they're making. And I have questions about these things. And I've always landed in the same place as you have. Like, I don't mind if somebody has the beliefs that they do, as long as there's proof of effort to understand why you believe what you believe, and that there's always the door is open to changing beliefs with more information.
Oh my gosh.
And hopefully that is how we can move through life, is like, yeah, I have really strong beliefs about this now, but if I get more information, you know, like I don't believe the same things about the world as I did when I was 5. You know, I'm trying to remember what my son said the other day, where he was like, I used to think that it was this just because of the way that it was worded, and that's what made sense to him. And then when he found out what it actually, I wish I could think of what it actually was, because it was a pretty good metaphor. And we stop doing that at some point when we become adults. And I'm not sure. I mean, part of it might be because it takes a lot of effort still to think about things all the way through, to ask questions. It takes a lot of effort, and our brains don't naturally like that.
No, my daughter said, so there was a similar example last night for us too, because we were talking about, we're driving down to Georgia next month, which is like, you know, 18, 19 hours from Maine. It's not a really easy drive. And she's like, wow, I used to think that driving to the grocery store, which mind you, the grocery store for us is 5 minutes away. She's like, I used to think that driving to the grocery store was really far away, but now I know that Georgia's a lot farther. So like, again, change in perspective and having this clarity and this, like, again, new information, new experience. That's a new experience example. Now that I've had this experience, this no longer seems relevant. This statement that I said that was my truth no longer seems accurate. But then we get into like this whole thing online of like, well, you flip-flop your belief systems and you don't have a platform, which I'm like, it's okay to change your mind. Like, it's okay. Like, it's okay. Since when was it like, I don't know when that kind of paradigm shift took place. I feel like it was kind of, for me, I feel like it was during Obama's election. Of like the flip-flopping kind of perspective where they were like, I forget who it was, but there was a couple people in politics that were like changing their beliefs and changing their policies and changing their perspective, and neither good nor bad. I don't remember what it was or what it pertained to, but I think that's when the flip-flopping of like, oh, I'm never able to change my belief system ever. I must stand on this hill and die. I'm like, gross. Like, that's not how I want to live.
I wonder if that like pushes the button on people's deep sense of justice, like justice and fairness, because even though we know that the world is not just and it is not fair, somehow we feel like if somebody says something and then they change their mind, that is not fair. And that is like, they're not going to follow through on what they said they were going to do, or like, how can I, well, maybe that's what it is like it bumps into that deep sense of like security. Like, if I can't, who can I trust?
Yes.
And that's a big question.
I look at it as basically we took evolution and like the being able to evolve our thoughts and being able to evolve as humans and like snipped it. We're like, okay, that no longer happens. That no longer needs to happen. And I've asked people too, I'm like, do you have that's similar to you? I'm like, do you have the same belief since you were 7? Do you believe that Halloween is like the best day ever? And it's like, now I use that one because I like to pick on Halloween, but like at 7, you're like, that holiday is like, my daughter's, that holiday is so cool. It's the best holiday. I'm like, ugh, I hate Halloween. Let's talk about Thanksgiving though. Like, I love Thanksgiving. Hated Thanksgiving when I was a kid. I'm like, that's stupid. Family, turkey, Macy's Day Parade. That's not even a holiday. There's no presents. And I'm like, okay, cool. Let's like, but if you can boil it down to something as simple as that, and like have people like, because there would be no one who I could ever have a conversation with who'd be like, no, my favorite holiday from a kid is still like basically now the same holiday, or like I still have the same belief systems from when I was a kid. I'm like, why can't we do that as an adult? Why can't we do that from 18 to 28 when we have other milestones? When we have other milestones, when we get married, when we have kids, you know, when we have a job, when we have a business, like our belief systems change at different milestones, and that's okay.
I think the point of that is like the personal evolution is happening anyway.
Correct.
It's not happening. It just is. It's how much are you going to put yourself in a place of distress by digging in your heels, by asserting that things must always stay the same, because they don't, inevitably. And also, like, how much are we intentionally choosing the new things that we're going to think and believe? When people come to this point of looking at the life that they have and they're saying, I don't want to do it like that anymore, what do you recommend? I mean, you shared your personal experience of like tapering yourself off of things and going cold turkey on some other things. And if we're going to take that as like a metaphor for other parts of life, how do you recommend someone actually, number one, listen to that internal guidance, and then number two, actually put that into motion and action and change their lives?
That's such a long question.
Maybe we could start with the first part, is how do people listen and hear that internal guidance?
So it's so interesting because kind of what's coming to mind is I'm just like thinking through being in my line of work. What I do is create people plans for them to get more intentional and listen to their internal guidance system. And I've created 200 plus plans, and every single one of them is so different. So like when I'm thinking through, I'm like, there's so much, like I wish there was a blanket RX. I wish there was a blanket, you know, just do this, breathe this way, write this, and you'll be healed. And it's not like that. It's so heavily based on who we are, how we operate, what our belief systems currently are, what our childhood was, what our trauma was, what our risk tolerance is. There's so many different factors in here that I'm like, I don't know if there is a blank RX perspective, which is probably why I'm in my line of work. I feel like there are, and it's probably why I also have 37,000 modalities that I'm trained in. Because I'm like, Reiki is amazing. but Reiki might not work for you. Breath work's amazing, but breath work might not work for you. Journaling's amazing, but it might not work for you. And like, that's not to sound negative. It's just like, I worked with a client the other day, and everything that we did, like, he has to be connected to outside. He has to be out in nature. He has to be hiking through the woods. He has to be alone. He has to be in solitude. He has to have quiet. He has to have stillness, which is so different than, I'm like, if I were to tell him to, just listen to a meditation and he'll be perfectly fine, that's not his blueprint. So I think it's like, for me, if I could boil it down, it's really figuring out kind of and tapping into your own blueprint of how you operate. Being a computer geek and kind of in tech, I look at everyone's kind of system as like an operating system. And it's how you're operating, what your capacity is, what memory you have, how much hard drive you have, how much RAM you have, kind of like all of these different tech pieces. And essentially, how when you have a Mac or whatever, or PC, you have to shut everything down, upload then and install the new operating system, and it takes off the old operating system. There's that pause in there where it's the upload and then the pause and then the download. So I feel like that, to me, if I could boil everything down, is literally having the space and the ability to do that, to figure out like, what is my new operating system, and then how do I install it, to be super geeky shaman with it.
A geeky shaman. I love that.
I'm like, but that's what it is.
Yeah.
Like, and you could run whatever Oasis on yours and Maverick on someone else's. And if you tried Maverick on yours, you'd glitch and you'd be like misfiring, and you'd probably have Windows shut down that shouldn't be shut down, and things wouldn't work if you just take someone else's operating system and someone else's prescription.
That's a really fantastic metaphor. If we understand that, like, we're not our thoughts, and that we can get into this space where we can observe what we're thinking about. And that if I'm feeling angry, that doesn't mean something about me. That means something about how I'm perceiving something and taking things in, and it's working through my body, et cetera, et cetera. When there is a difference between something that you feel is right and something that you know is right. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
It does. I mean, I feel like we've stopped questioning ourselves because we want to be so sure, and we want to have all of the knowledge and all of the ability and be perfect. There's like this air of perfectionism where, like, if I was feeling anger, I was on my walk this morning and I had some things come up, and I was like, oh, and I'll just flat out tell it on the podcast because I'm an open book. But I was we had Pompeii, the song by Bastille, which I don't know if you're familiar with. It was a 2013 song come up at one of the events and one of the gatherings that I was at with two of my other co-founders. And we were all talking about, what was going on in 2013 for us. And it was all pivotal moments of like, I listened to that song on repeat for like 4 hours in the car as I was like ending a relationship, like just like there's a lot of story to it. And I was focusing on the good stuff. And today I'm, doing my walk and I'm jamming out to Spotify, and Pompeii comes on, and I had this whole feeling of emotion come up because yes, it was a happy time because I was going to that ashram I mentioned. This was another time, and I was doing a 6-week silent retreat, and it's a really joyful place for me. The reason I was going is because I had to let go of 20 members on my team that I had built that were basically family to me right before Christmas. So like, I can have this joyful emotion, but I had this deep anger come up, and I was like, okay, like, why is anger coming up? And when I start to kind of question myself and start to go into that, it's because I had so much other stuff going on, and I had so much other stuff that I was processing that I never fully processed, that I let 20 people go that were basically family of mine because of the misorganization of this company that I was working for. And I was like, okay, so now why is that coming up for me? Like, my next question is like, okay, cool. I'm in this massive growth trajectory for Aligned and for Aya and for everything else that we're building, kind of the WellTech AI program. We're building an MTSS, which is a multi-tiered support system for like social media for school systems and 13 to 18-year-old kids. So I'm like, why am I like feeling all of this? And why is this coming up? And like, this synergy seems very strange. I was like, oh, because I don't want to build something that's not sustainable and have to do that again. But it was a series of me questioning why I'm feeling this and where it's coming from and what's the root of it. And like, for me, then it's like, what needs to be healed from this? And then going down that rabbit hole of, couple tissues later, reapplication of mascara, and I mean, just being real about it. And it was literally saying like, I don't want to build something that I can't, that's not sustainable. And it's like, well, you've done that before and you've come out of it. And here's like, there's lessons that you've had because of that, that you know how to do it differently now. So then there's this changing of like, I felt the anger. I felt the kind of deep inner rage, because that's where I go, kind of go to the dark side, if you will. Felt this deep inner rage and like this kind of righteous justice of like, how dare they build something and then not be able to sustain it, and then have me pass it on to me to have to do that to like my people. Which like I was in a team of like 40 people that literally we said I love you at the end of phone calls with like a corporate environment. That doesn't happen. But like that's the type of environment we built. And that's the type of environment I'm building again. So I was like, okay, so felt that, felt the deep rage piece. And then out of that rage, after, kind of spending some time feeling that, came gratitude of like, no, I got to fucking build that team. I got to have people that I trusted and that had my back and I had theirs. And there were outside circumstances that I could not control, that I could have done nothing differently to change and shift that from, but I get to do it again and I have control and my team has control now. So
thank you for sharing that.
Real life example from this morning.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And going back to what we were talking about earlier about this like tendency that we have to spiritualize things and make them like we're trying like jump ahead to the gratitude without actually moving through the anger. And we think what that looks like is we're actually jumping ahead to the gratitude, but we're not. We've got because you can't feel the depth of the gratitude unless you feel the depth of the anger to get to the gratitude. So that's such a helpful, thank you for sharing that, because that is really helpful. I think it's going to be very helpful for people to hear that even the hardest things that we feel are temporary, and that we only get to the other side really by moving through those things.
And I don't know why, this has been a question of mine for a couple of years now, why we labeled anger as bad, and why we labeled fear as bad, and why we labeled shame and guilt as bad. Like they're emotions, but like, why are they any less? We've almost invalidated them, if that makes sense. So like we've had kind of like, even if you look at like spectrums of consciousness and emotional spectrums from traditional psychology, there's like a line in the middle and it's bad emotions and good emotions. I'm like, why does it have to be so black and white? Like, I'm thankful that I felt fear. I'm thankful. I mean, it kept me alive a number of times. Yeah. Like, I'm thankful I felt, guilt and shame, because you know what? It also allows me to feel presence and joy and be able to be expressive. Like, I'm thankful I felt anger and rage because it got me to move through it to feel thankful. So, but yeah, we have this really weird, bad, good.
Right. And in like this, in the spiritual community too, like it still is labeled good and bad, but it's relabeled as like low vibe, high vibe.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Like it's high vibes only, good vibes only. And I'm like, I don't think so. Like bring me all the vibes. I want to have all the vibes, because that is what being alive is. It's like, I was thinking about how in our culture, not only do we try to numb out the bad feelings, but we also get a lot of pressure to not be like too happy or too excited or whatever. And it's like where people are comfortable is this baseline. But if you, or this, this kind of like numb center, but what that looks like, on a heart monitor is dead, because you don't have the variability, you don't have the range, you're flatlined. And so to me, I think anyone that is moving through life, you can't selectively numb stuff. So you numb the good stuff, you numb the bad stuff. And if we're moving through life, just numbing ourselves out, escaping life, not willing to have the hard conversations, completely bypassing all the emotion that is really difficult to feel in our bodies because it doesn't feel good, that's death. That is not aliveness. And the life and the experience of feeling the highs and the lows is what this human experience is about. And in that, allowing ourselves to feel everything that we're feeling is how we then connect with other people and help other people come alive. Can you talk to me about, I mean, we've just thrown out the words like aligned social, but can you talk about what aligned social is and what you're hoping that this company is going to do?
Yeah, so it is a social media platform without the media.
Mm.
That's the best way to sum it up. It is a platform. I look at social media and I see just this deep disconnection from self and from others now. I've not gotten a friend recommendation or like I call them curated connections in on social media ever that I was like, oh, this person says that a platform says the algorithms I should connect with and I genuinely should connect with. That doesn't exist. But there's no shortage of sponsored posts, ads, things that I need, vacations that I'm missing out on, travel, cars, models that I'm missing out of getting the next latest, greatest, fastest version of. So it's basically become this platform where we're just consuming content. And highlight reeling ourselves of look at how great like I mentioned, my kids are. There's never a bad hair day. My lipstick is always perfect and my eyebrows are always perfectly waxed. Like not really true. Because we've kind of have this now standard of like an air of perfection because it has to look good on, a feed. And that's where we get all these things like filters and, whatever fake eyelashes and fake Botox filters and whatever the case may be. So basically what I did was, and what my team has done, we've built a platform that is strictly for social connection and for wellness and for embodiment and for presence and for intentional use. Like my goal is to not keep someone on a platform for 6 or 8 hours a day. My goal is for you to go on for 30 minutes, for you to see your people, what they're doing, all chronological, no ads unless you opt in a different feed for those. And then for you to basically get connected, get plugged into what's actually happening in your area with your people, and then to get off and to go live life, not through the lens of a camera on like with a filter on a computer. Like that to me is not a life well lived. But it has become very quickly over the past probably 10, 15 years, the standard. Which baffles me and blows my mind of like going out and seeing, a group of young teenage girls and all of them are on the phone and all of them have the perfect angle and all of them, are posting real time. And there's no actually talking going on. There's no actually communication going on. It's just, let's get the picture from the best angle to look the best. And I was like, that's not true connection to oneself. So we live in a society right now that even though we're more connected than ever, we feel more disconnected than ever, which blows my mind and like baffles me every time I say it and every time I read something that's along that storyline. But basically what we've done is create a new way to social is kind of our tagline. And one of our beta test users is like, it's an oasis away from traditional social media. Which I'm like, that's what it should be. Like, it should feel like life-giving. It should feel like we leave and we feel like our cup is a little bit more full. We should feel like we connected with another human when we leave social media. Like it's literally in the definition and in the name, but it's not what's going on right now. So, yeah.
It is wild that there's an epidemic of loneliness when we have more opportunities than ever to be connected to people. Yeah. And so you're in the beta testing phase with Align Social. I'm really curious about like, how is this going to end up being something that people pay to be on? Because like I'm that's the only way that these social media companies function is by selling ads, and that's why it's free because we're the
product.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I spent and my team spent probably close to 9 months trying to figure out this social media puzzle. And originally we were like, we're just going to build an app that overlays your social media and it's going to make it more intentional. But what we realized pretty quickly on is that what's going on is systemic and it's built into the foundation, and you can never change the top of a house if the foundation is shoddy. The house, no matter what you do, is going to have its way of crumbling. So what we did was basically burn down every single element of current social media and recreate it. So just for sake of example, your feeds, you have 3 feeds. They're all chronological ordered. Your first one is your people. It's your top 8 ride or die, the people that you want to see their kids. You want to see everything about them. You want to stay connected to them because they're your person. Now because I'm your person, you may not be my person, and there's no way of knowing that.
Hmm.
Because it shouldn't be like, well, Morgan, I added you to number 3, so you need to add me to number 1, 2, or 3. Like that's not social media. That's just petty. We didn't want to get into that. The second feed is it's called choices. It's everything you align yourself with. So it's all the people. It's not just your 8, but it's, maybe the person that you don't want to see every day, but still want to stay connected. And it's all of the businesses you want to connect with. And again, chronological, very easy to kind of sort. No ads in either one of those feeds, no AI content in either one of those feeds. The final feed, which is my favorite feed and kind of my baby, it's named Also, ALSO, Aligned Social. And essentially what it is curated content, which is done through our AI. So it might say, Morgan and Cass, you guys have 20 things in common. You also both like these 30 accounts. May we send you an introduction and an icebreaker together. So like, oh, cool. Like I want to connect with someone new. Like you're going to go to that feed to find that. It's also going to have curated wellness. All of our algorithms are based on a wellness index. So I took this from the Ayurvedic texts they say everything that you consume, food, water, content, books, etc., conversations, people, has to be transmuted and digested through the body. When you look at what's happening on social media and you're just consuming an inundation of information, there's no way to actually process through the body. So this is kind of our way of having other pieces of information that might be beneficial from a health wellness index perspective. If you want to consume them, you can go and consume them, but it's by your choice. It's not by pushed upon you. And then there's also ads content in there. We will have an ad platform that we build that is, one of the ways that we make money. But all of our ads have to actually provide value. So you just can't just for me as example, I just can't be like, hey, posting this shamanic healing assessment, next 10 people get it for 50% off. That's not a thing. I will have to give some sort of meditation or some sort of tip or some sort of journaling prompt or something else that adds benefit in order to advertise on the platform. So that means whatever you consume in that also feed is also easily digestible and adding value to you. So again, totally different way of doing it. But they're like that. That's our way. The ads will be a little bit different. So we don't have to solely depend on ads. We're $5 a month. So my joke is one subpar cup of coffee, one subpar craft beer, or a pretty decent kombucha. Like take your pick, avoid one of those once a month, and then kind of reallocate your money to this direction. So yeah, so it's a different way of doing social media. But it takes the onus off me to have people like, I don't have to have you spend time like 8 hours on the platform. My metric is not about that. My metric is about, how you're using, what you're doing. We have a value-based index. So when you're going in, you're checking in because I want your vibration to raise. I don't want we notice downward spirals. I don't want you to get stuck in that downward spiral. We have kind of resources and pieces that in our AI and in our technology to assist that like, I don't want you on for 8 hours a day. I don't want to run Zoom meetings or whatever it's called through the metaverse. I don't want to run the entire business through a metaverse. Like I want you to leave the computer. I want you to actually put your phone down personally, ideally face down so you can't see notifications, and then actually get out and experience life. Because all too well, life is entirely too freaking short.
Very short. What are some of the ways that when you get off your phone, that you tap in and ring out?
So my screen time, I actually switched to an Android. This might be, a confrontational topic.
You just lost so many listeners.
I know, they were like, we liked her, and then she switched to an Android. But hear me out, guys. Don't tune out quite yet. I was on the iPhone since the iPhone 1. And every time you get an iPhone, basically you get the same. They download all the apps, all the contents, all the contacts, all of your text message chains come through. Everything comes with you. And even though I know all of this stuff and have studied all of this stuff and have degrees in some of this stuff, I looked one day and my screen time was 8 hours and 53 minutes. Which to some people they're like, oh, that's really good. Mine was like 12 hours. I'm like, great. That is like terrifying. So for me, it was just a check. And I was like, what can I do? If you didn't know this about me, now you do. I have a radical pattern of just going for it full on and just chasing. I'm like, I just stopped a handful of pills, no big deal. I'm like, I literally went to the store the next day and traded in my iPhone for an Android. Before then, my best friend can attest, I did not know how to turn on an Android, which is so sad. Like I had to learn an entire new operating system, download everything from scratch. My contacts didn't transfer over, had to figure out a new email, like had to do everything from scratch. But now my screen time per day is less than an hour.
Wow.
Because I'm not as attached to it and as tethered to it as I was. So that's my kind of pattern interrupt, if you will. Again, not saying that everyone should go burn their iPhones. I'm getting an iPhone in September. Relax, guys. The 15 is coming out and I'm excited about it. I'm not uploading and bringing all of my baggage with me to my new iPhone. I needed that pause. I needed that break. It pissed a lot of people off that I was no longer highlighted in blue on the. But yeah, it's that for me was a really big realization of what I was consuming and what I was doing to myself, because it's easy to get in that cycle. Literally, there are data scientists who push us into those cycles. So now kind of my doing that, I still have times where, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I have TikTok downloaded. And if like I just finished something stressful and I'm like, I just need to disassociate for 5 minutes, I'll scroll. There's nothing wrong with it, but it has to be done from an embodied presence sense. It can't just be done because it happens to be convenient. The amount, I forget the percentage. I was reading an article the other day and it was like 80% or 85% of people use their cell phones while they're using the bathroom. And I was like, interesting.
I am one of that 85%. I'll just say it.
Yeah, I am too. But I was like, 85. I was like, I thought I was the only one because kids, quiet moment, toilet door closed. Like, but I was like, ooh, 85%. I was like, that's beyond the majority. That's even people who are older who never grew up with a cell phone are now taking their cell phones to the bathroom. I'm like, I have a huge issue with that. Be a place of solitude and solidarity, if any place is.
Right. It's this, I wonder how much of it is like that we just have lost the ability to be bored, which is really unfortunate, because if you look at anybody who has made significant discoveries in science, in technology, all of these spaces, they all talk about the downtime being the times when they got the ideas. Like Einstein talked about that, Tesla talked about that, like all of these amazing people throughout history talk about it. It was in those moments of letting themselves just be bored in their minds.
You want to know what mine is?
Please.
When I'm blow drying my hair. It's like the strangest thing. I got a notebook specifically for my bathroom because all of my good ideas will come either when I'm showering or blow drying my hair. And mid blow dry, you don't want to be like, okay, let me put this down. So I literally put the blow dry down, don't even turn it off, or write something down and then continue to dry.
I love that.
I hate blow drying my hair. So now, but now that I've had, I don't know, so many epiphanies over the past months while blow drying my hair. I've started blow drying my hair because I'm like, I want another idea.
That's so great. It's fun to think about too, under what conditions, what are all of the factors here that are contributing to me being in this mindset state, and wondering if that can be recreated somewhere else. That's just, it's like this. I think I say this more than probably anything else on anything that I ever put out, is how important it is to just be a little scientist in your life and experiment with stuff. We have access to 50,000 different tools of mindfulness, et cetera, but if you don't actually take one out of the pool and say I'm going to test this out for myself, then what's the point? What's the point of having access to all this information? And to not overwhelm ourselves with trying everything, but just try it and listen to what's happening in your body when you're doing those things, and see if it works for you, and be willing to change when it stops.
Yep. Find your blueprint.
Your blueprint. I love that. Oh man, Cass, thank you so much for joining me on this podcast today. This was such a phenomenal conversation. And I am one of the beta testers for Align Social, and I cannot wait for people to be able to really connect in the ways that we'd really desperately want to connect with other people. and that you are creating a tool for that to happen. That is so exciting. And I love the crossover. I know we talked about this before we started recording, but the crossover between the spiritual realm and shamanism, and also technology and ethical technology and AI. And the goal of all of it is for us to understand that we are all in this together. There is much less of a difference between me and even someone who is on the opposite end of the political or religious spectrum as I am. We have much more in common than we think we do, just by virtue of having this shared human experience.
Correct. At this exact time and at this exact place. So,
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun.
It has been fun. And before we go, P.S. we expire.